Welcome to Deja View. I'm reviews editor Jake Leary, and this is the Ithacan's podcast for going in depth with our reviews of the week. This week we're talking about Split with a few select members of the community, our staff writer Colin Barrett, Paul Mikowski of CAPS, and Maggie, who reached out to us about our Split review and about the movie itself. All right, let's just launch right into it. Here we go. The film Split has been receiving a lot of backlash for its portrayal of mental illness, in particular DID, which is Dissociative Identity Disorder. And we ran a review for it that addressed this issue, but we didn't handle it in the best way. So our review became part of the problem, part of the misinformation that is out there about DID, formerly known as multiple personality disorder. And we received feedback from somebody who you'll hear from a little bit later about why our review was damaging and how they felt about it as somebody who lives with DID. And they came in and they spoke to both myself and the writer about what we could do better, about how we could better educate people about the disorder, about how people commonly misperceive the disorder, and ways that we could be better both as a publication and as people with handling mental illness as a whole. Here's an excerpt from staff writer Colin Barrett's Split review. To view the film as an attack against those with mental disorders would be to paint a false stroke with a broad brush. Art engages an audience by depending on familiar terms to create unfamiliar situations and often makes mistakes in the process. Staff writer Colin Barrett spoke to Paul Mikowski, a psychologist at the Ithaca College Center for Counseling, Health, and Wellness. Here's some of his interview.
Having seen or not seen Split, what do you think of the premise of the film from a professional medical standpoint?
Yeah. So I think about a couple things here. So one is, first of all, there's some debate in the community as to even what dissociative identity disorder is, what does it look like, how easy is it to diagnose. And probably the biggest thing that gets into me is two issues. So one being, we're talking about movies and media where people with, a condition or a diagnosis in these horror movies are usually the bad guy, violent, dangerous, serial killer, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. When in general, actually, the rates of violence among people who have diagnoses are lower than those who would have pretty much no diagnosis. Mm-hmm. Most violence is actually done by people who wouldn't qualify for what you might call psychiatric disorder, mental illness. So obviously that's problematic by itself. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of like more like the filmmaker's need for a plot hook or an explanation for weird behavior. So I think it's a sort of a cheap trick, honestly, for a horror movie person to say, this person is, use shaming and stigmatic words like crazy. So
yeah. So films like Split are portraying mental illness in a somewhat negative light. Yeah. Can they just be passed off as a horror film? Like we talked about Silence of the Lambs. I mean, Buffalo Bill can be considered transphobic or in any of those kind of, but yet that wins Best Picture and all these. Black Swan is about a psychotic ballerina, but yet she wins Best Actor or Best Actress. So can they be just passed off as films that kind of turn off your mind, popcorn thrillers, or they mean a lot more?
I think it's tricky, because I think we want depictions of interesting and different characters, and I can understand why we like interesting acting, Anthony Hopkins or whatever. But yeah, I think there's at least a subtle bad effect, if nothing else. You start to keep words like whatever, crazy or things like that being labels that really are shaming, right? And saying this person is other. When we know, it's roughly about, what is it, the statistic? It's something like roughly 1 out of 4 people at any given moment might qualify, or in the course of their lifetime, might qualify for a diagnosis. Mm-hmm. So to say these people are other, if they have a condition, is not even reflecting reality. Mm-hmm. So, I don't want to be the horror movie police, but I think that there are probably other ways to pick someone as being different or interesting without having to rely on, psychiatry or a diagnosis. So, and certainly anything around transgender, transphobia is going to be a big problem. I think Silence of the Lambs, while being an interesting horror movie, I like it as a horror movie, is regressive in that sense. Yeah. It's punching down to people who have less privilege anyway. So.
Definitely.
I am here today with Colin Barrett, our staff writer who wrote the Split review, and Maggie, who is part of a DID system. So to start out, I figured we'd just have Colin run through his thoughts on Split initially, right after he saw it, and start there.
So initially, right after I saw the film, I'm not gonna lie, really, really enjoyed it. I thought it was a really intense thriller and was shot very well. But after some talking to other people and listening and reading other reviews, I now see how it can be very, very problematic on how it portrays mental illness and mental disorders.
And Maggie, when you initially read the review, what were your thoughts on that? Had you read other reviews for the film previously and were out looking for material, or did you just stumble across it?
Yeah, we have pretty much gone out of our way to avoid anything to do with the film as much as possible. The review was sent to us by a friend of ours. At first, we were pretty upset, but then it became very clear that a lot of it is just misinformation.
Well, before we get into that, and if you're comfortable, would you mind describing a little bit about DID for people who don't know?
Sure. So DID stands for Dissociative Identity Disorder, formerly known as Multiple Personalities Disorder. DID is caused by childhood trauma, prolonged trauma between the ages of 6 and 9, usually resulting from sexual abuse or other kinds of prolonged trauma. And as a result of that, the brain is so incapable of processing what happens that other human beings, known as alters, not personalities, form within the body. The problem with DID is not the presence of the alters, it's whatever trauma in childhood caused it. So the alters are there as a coping mechanism. Most systems, all the alters are very close. So you have therapists who are very into this idea of integration, which is essentially like mashing everyone back into one person, which can seem ideal in theory, I guess, for people who aren't familiar with how existing in a system works. But just like you wouldn't want to wake up one day not existing, neither do we. So that's sort of our brief overview.
And you started to talk a little bit about some of the misconceptions that
Sure.
people have.
Mm-hmm.
Could you go a little bit more into that?
Yeah, I think a lot of where that comes from is the only representation you see of DID in the media is horror movies like this, crime dramas, and it's always, this person has DID and at least one of them's a serial killer. Will they be stopped? And realistically, people believe the information that they have. So if you're seeing these depictions over and over and have no other basis of comparison, you're going to believe that. So DID is very much one of the, like, quote-unquote scary mental illnesses that even a lot of therapists aren't great about.
Okay, so now I think we'll move a little bit towards Split.
Sure.
And discuss some of the problems that you've seen there, some of the problems with our review and how we covered that.
I think just like any marginalized group of people, there's a real problem with majority groups sort of talking over the voices of the people who are experiencing it. There are things that people don't really think about as being ableist, but like something that we like to talk about a lot is the use of the word crazy as it is incorporated into like the regular just public vernacular. Because now it's something, the meaning has very much shifted away from what it used to mean, and now it's, anything can be crazy, like a party you went to last weekend, it was a crazy party. But where that word initially stems from is a place of violence for a lot of mentally ill folks, because DID is something, if we could still be locked away for it, we would be. It's something people are afraid of, it's something that people who don't have it don't really know how to respond to. So 20, 30 years ago, we'd be in an asylum. And it's pretty well known how mentally ill patients were treated in asylums. So that's a word we like to educate people on avoiding. Words like psychopath and sociopath, which you hear used interchangeably and incorrectly all the time. Neither of those words should ever be used. A lot of people are very willing to listen, you guys included. You've been, like, since we pointed out the issues in your article, you've been great and so willing to learn and listen. And that really doesn't happen very often. There's a lot of fear, I would say, associated with mental illness in general, unless it's things that are more palatable, like anxiety and depression, because people can sympathize with that more. When there are symptoms that are scarier, it's much easier for people to pull back in fear than it is to empathize with us and understand where we're coming from and ask the important questions about how we function on a daily basis.
So I want to bounce back to you here, Colin, and get your reaction to Split now after being exposed to all of this. And I'm sure it'll be very similar to the reaction I've had myself, but I wanted to hear a little bit more from you.
I cannot lie that I still enjoyed the movie. I can't unlike a movie or any kind of media that I originally did like. I just feel like that is a cheap way to go about things. But after learning so much from Maggie and just this experience, my opinion on the film has definitely changed about how these stories can be told, why these stories are told, and where is the line? Like, where can we cross the line and where should we just stay away from?
All right, that's Deja View for this week. I'm reviews editor Jake Leary, and come back every Tuesday for more in-depth looks at the reviews of the week.